Thank you. It's wonderful to be back here for this fourth event, and welcome to everybody, particularly, of course, our two guests. And it's not true that you had to be called David, of course, to get a seat at the table tonight, but we might get to that in a while, we'll see. But David Davis is the Shadow Minister for Public Transport, Planning and Equality in the Legislative Council for the Southern Metropolitan Electorate, and formerly a chiropractor, and first elected in 1996. He served as the Minister for Health and Ageing between 2010 and 2014, and studied philosophy, so not law. That's very great. Welcome. And David Morris, Shadow Minister for Finance and Local Government from the Mornington electorate, formerly worked in small business, elected to the Legislative Assembly in 2006 and re-elected in 2010 and 2014. So a very warm welcome. Look, I had a particular sort of structure for tonight's event planned, but it is a very intimate audience, and because of that I'm going to adapt what I'd first intended to do, which was to have perhaps a 45-minute or half-hour conversation and then throw it over to questions. I'd like to really open it up to the audience really very early on, because there's enough time with this number of people for everybody to actually be able to ask a question. And because you've taken the time to come, I might sort of intersperse my own questions with you coming in. And it is a slightly different way of doing it, but I feel like the numbers are small enough that we can manage that. I'm now going to there's 44 days until this election, and it's close. You're both seasoned campaigners. What is interesting you about this campaign that is perhaps different to the previous campaigns you've been involved in? I throw it to you.
I think you're first off. There you are.
Well, there you go. I'm not sure that there's very much different about it at all. It's actually probably not a question to ask those who are involved in it, because it's a very different experience when you're inside the process. I think this is my 8th campaign between local government and the state parliament, and every one of them has been a little bit different. I think probably the narrative over that time, because it's now over 30 years, is the impact of technology, and probably in this campaign, social media, while it was important in 2014, it's probably more important now, and the media scene is quite different.
Yep.
Look, I think there's lots of things that are the same about this campaign, but I think one of the things that's quite interesting is the lack of scrutiny on the government. And I think that there's a number of key aspects. I mean, government called the election but tabled about half the annual reports. If our government had done that, we would have been smashed in the media. Smashed. But that's not the case. And this government has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars of public money stolen in 2014. It's been uncovered by the Ombudsman. The police extortion squad is investigating that. And there's minimal media coverage. I just think that's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it in my time in public life, which is very long. I've never seen anything like it. If our government had corruptly taken hundreds of thousands, we would have been smashed. So there's a real disconnect, I think, in the community at the moment and in the media.
It's certainly true, isn't it, that every story, no matter how big, seems to have a time limit on it, doesn't it? It's like a sort of egg timer, and when it runs out, it just moves on.
And yet the theft of, taxpayers' money on a colossal scale and the partial cover-up of it doesn't seem to fully cut through, and that deeply troubles me.
All right, let's get to policy and the policy area for each of you that is most important, and then I'm going to actually throw it open to include audience members as well, but the policy area that is most important to you.
Well, I'm in a rather difficult situation because we've yet to announce any local government policy.
Why?
It's just about the process, just a matter of timing.
It's only 44 days left.
Exactly right, Chair.
So you want to announce some here tonight?
No,
It's not many of us.
I'd be happy to, but I think I might be in trouble. No, I mean, I think I'm happy to talk in general terms, and it's, you know, reflects the opposition's view of the world, particularly when it comes to local government. I think there's been, obviously, in this term, a lot of focus on a draft act that got out of the Assembly but didn't proceed in the Council. But there hasn't really been, in my view, enough focus on the relationship between local government and the community and state government. And it's one of the things about it that troubles me is there seems to be very rarely a shared vision of where a particular community is going, or even a willingness to work closely together. There's been, I think, an enormous amount of point scoring, and it's, you know, well, I've said to a number of gatherings of councillors, it's an easy shot as a state member of parliament to go out and bag a council. You get ahead, you'll get an article in your local paper if that's what you want to do. It's something I try and avoid studiously. But it's an easy hit. I think we need to, while the work that's been done on the Act is important, and I think it's a good start, I think we need to also have a more nuanced look at the relationship between local government, between state government, and the communities we're both trying to serve, and sort of get back to a more respectful and hopefully more productive relationship.
Is that a specific policy area we can hold our breath on hearing more about in the next
There will
40
certainly
days?
be elements of that.
There's actually, just before I get to you, a specific question that somebody sent into the VLGA that about what is the opposition's position and intentions in regard to the 2018 local government bill tabled earlier in the year.
Yeah. In terms of the detail, I think the best guide is probably my second reading speech in the Assembly. We don't have half an hour tonight, so I won't try and go through all those details. But my essential position, and our essential position is that there's some good work has been done. There are still a long list of issues, not so much for VLGA, I know, but certainly for the MAV, a long list of concerns. There were many aspects of it that I felt were three-quarters cooked, but not quite there yet. And our preferred action when we debated the bill in the Assembly was to ask a Legislative Council committee to have a look at it and conduct public hearings. One of the reasons we're keen to do that is because while there has been an enormous amount of consultation and some very good consultation, it did to an extent become, in the latter stages, a little bit of a navel-gazing exercise. It was about the sector and the government talking to one another rather than in concert with the community. And now, I'm not saying getting solid community feedback is easy, it's not, it's hard. And I think the work done at the outset was good, but by the time we got to the final product, it was a very different product from what was in the marketplace originally, if I can put it that way. And I think we need to connect that work back to the community. The other aspect of that, of course, is that the bill that went into the House was not the final draft exposure, not the final exposure draft. And there were some significant changes. And I would have much preferred that the government had gone back and said, all right, well, we're proposing these changes, what do you think? And in fact, you know, I've been around long enough to remember when the last local government bill went through, what's now the 1989 Act, and I think there was something like 5 iterations of draft bills. But the final bill that went into the House reflected the final draft bill. And that's not the case in this instance. I think the bottom line, I think there's some good stuff in it, but I think we need more community input, but it provides a good solid starting point for the next Parliament.
David.
Well, I agree with that description, and we didn't get to debate it in our chamber in the Legislative Council. But I think we have to be very careful to protect what we have with local government in Victoria, because the model we have here is very different from the rest of the country. And, you know, in many respects, as Health Minister, I treasured the relationship with local government because here was a mechanism to actually work with people close to the community to actually deliver outcomes. And that is, again, not the case in many other parts of Australia and elsewhere around the world. So we have quite a unique model in Victoria, and we have to make sure that that is protected. So, I mean, I could go through a long list of things, whether it be environmental things or, you know, tobacco policy, for example. We were able to achieve enormous amounts of, you know, important steps with tobacco control policy. But, you know, as Health Minister, you can't just reach down and do that. You actually need to collaborate and work with local government to deliver outcomes. And, you know, I was very proud to do so. And I think we got very good results. And I think that we tamper with that at our peril.
Is there anybody that would particularly like to ask a follow-up question to this area? Yeah, we've got a microphone because we are recording. Great.
Thank you, Jackie Stacey, City of Yarra. That relationship between the state and local government is vital, and I appreciate what's been said, particularly with David Davis's comment on Health Minister, because if we work together we can achieve so much more, and often it doesn't work that way. And I want to highlight 3 things. One...
Well, just let me say one thing. It sometimes is up to ministers to make it work that way and to actually go and do the extra yards and to talk to people, associations and others. And honestly, I tried to do that on every key occasion when there was an engagement.
I attended some of those engagements, and it was a great process. I think you're only minister for a month, and you had a meeting with, and there was, what was it, about 500 of us all keen to have the discussion about the relationship with the federal government health initiatives, and it was a good process. So, but I wanted to highlight 3 things in terms of the relation between state and local government. First of all, we've got the state-local government agreement, and it's recently been, well, recently, it's probably a few years now, renegotiated to ensure that not just the Minister for Local Government signed that agreement with the MAB, but the Premier, and so with a commitment to promulgate it more broadly and to review it every 12 months. Now, I'm not aware that that's happening.
Jackie, we'll have to turn it into a question if there's
so
3 points
I'm
here.
sure it's happened. So,
yeah, great.
What is happening with that? Is it do all ministers and all administrators know of its existence? Because we in local government often feel that it's not implemented. Secondly, the other, I said to David Davis, I've just come back from Kenya, where there's some really interesting provisions between the central government and, well, the county, which is the equivalent of local, in a way, equivalent of local government, which requires some administrators in the state or the higher tier of government to ensure that they do consult and inform the community. And this is written in the Constitution, so it's quite powerful. And also provisions about financing local government to be able to deliver commensurate with their responsibilities.
Okay, we need a question.
So,
yeah.
What response would there be to changes in the state constitution or and the local government, which actually reflects those which enables better working together and co-joint delivery?
Yeah, with regard to the agreement, the current agreement was signed, I think at the MAB dinner, so it's about 4 years ago this month. Signed by Dennis Napthine and Tim Ball at the time as the Minister. And as far as I'm aware, nothing further has happened from there, but David and I can't in any way take responsibility for that lack of action. I mean, I had a bit to do with the agreement in terms of getting it up as Parliamentary Secretary for Local Government. I think it's a good agreement. I think it's the foundation for a strong relationship. Sorry?
Question in Parliament about reviewing.
So my point, and I think I made this point to Jackie on some broader points. She's relating some useful commentary about other constitutions, is sometimes structural things are actually not what it's about. Sometimes it's actually relationships and a preparedness to actually pick up the phone or sit down with people or talk and actually engage and listen. And I think that's something that's been a bit lacking through this cycle. I think Tim Ball, and David as Parliamentary Secretary were quite approachable. Jeanette, a pal before, was a very approachable person. I think you've actually got to have that preparedness to listen and engage, whatever the legal structures are.
Anyone else on this?
My question is to the potential, in the next government, Minister for Local Government. I hear a lot from the ratepayers associations, a lot of them, all different groups. They are desperate. Well, one thing they can't even get to the minister, the current minister, but they're desperate. I think you'd get all their votes if you announced that you were going to have rate capping on councils for a couple of years. They're sick of the way the rates are going up.
Well, we have got rate
capping for 2 years.
Would you like to respond?
Well, the position we've taken with rate capping is that the current legislation needs to run its course and be reviewed, which I think is 2021.
Can't you change it to get into government?
Well, we want to find out the impact it's having. I mean, there are two issues. One is the rate capping legislation itself, which is constraining rate rises, but certainly not in the manner that the government promised prior to the last election.
It's a bit of a dog's breakfast, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a great structure. The second issue is the manner in which there are movements between classes of properties, and some are going up much quicker than others. That's an age-old problem with rating system. It's occurred since it was first introduced in the mid to late 1870s, but it's been accelerated significantly with the higher frequency of revaluations, so that the steps and the movements are much greater. When you look at the total revenue being raised by councils, it's, as I say, it's not what the government promised, but it has slowed significantly on the rate in earlier times. But notwithstanding that, and I've heard the arguments from the ratepayers groups very frequently.
In fact, you heard them in formal evidence at our
Exactly. I met with them on a number of occasions, and as David says, they gave evidence to Parliamentary Committee about 6 or 8 weeks ago. There is an issue with the rating system, and I'm not announcing any policy tonight, but that factor is not lost on me.
Well, the prices of houses are supposed to be dropping. Are the rates going to drop? You know, the ratepayers people tell me that rates have gone up so high because of the valuation of houses. Some of them are having to sell because they can't pay the rents.
I'm going to take that as a comment and I'm going to move on.
If you go, will the prices drop, rents drop, and the houses drop?
The relationship between the rates charged and the value of the property, the value of the property is used to apportion the rate burden across a municipality. It's not an absolute. It's not like land tax where the value of the property goes up, the land tax goes up. It's relative. I go back to my days as a councillor, and I'll try and be very quick about this. In 1990, the recession that we had to have, we had a revaluation in the old Shire of Mornington. The value was started at the top of Mount Eliza, just back from Oliver's Hill, and valued the properties at that end. Worked their way through the municipality, finished the bottom of Mount Martha just above Safety Beach. By the time the revaluation had been completed, the price of property had dropped significantly as a result of the recession. And that meant for 4 years, people in Mount Eliza paid proportionally much higher rates than the people in Mount Martha because their values had dropped. And then when we did the revaluation after that, all of a sudden it was back on an even keel. It's a method of apportionment. Whether it's the right method, I think is the question. But simply because your house goes down in value, if your house goes down in value to the same amount as everyone else's, your rates aren't going to move. If it goes down proportionally to the rest of the properties in the municipality, yes, your rates will go down.
I've got another question here sent in to the VLGA, which I'm going to ask to kick off those of you particularly who'd like to talk about transport. And this was sent in. How will the opposition improve bus services in outer suburban Melbourne? Patronage is decreasing and the services are patchy and unreliable in some areas. We can't continue to cram more people into trams and trains, and many areas don't have these services at all, so people are forced to rely on buses or private cars. Okay.
There's lots of aspects of this. The first is, it is correct that bus patronage is falling despite the massive increase in population, and that reflects unreliability. It reflects the fact that the government has not reviewed many of the service areas. I was in one regional city the other day, I won't name it, and there hasn't been a review of the bus services since 2008. And similar on the peninsula and many other places. So, you know, changing timetables with trains and trams, we need to make sure that the linkages are there. We need to make sure that the bus frequencies are sufficient. There's lots of opportunities for experimentation and innovation in terms of on-demand and smaller buses into deeper into estates that can actually service people more effectively. Some of the faster, trunk bus routes, if I can call them that, have been reasonably successful, but some have not. So, we've got a very mixed picture. The government, and I'm highly critical of this, went to war with the bus industry in March, April, May, June, seeking to nationalise the whole of the bus sector in Victoria. It's quite an extraordinary move, and the private bus companies naturally were unhappy about this. They didn't want to sign a contract that said, you will hand over in the period of the next contract your depots, your intellectual property, your buses, the works to the government or its nominee. So there was huge resistance on this, and in the end the government realised that it was on a loser and it backed off. But I'd make no mistake, be quite clear that if the government is re-elected, they will return to this and they will go back to that.
What will you do though?
Well, I'll make the first point that we will not nationalise the whole bus system. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we had the MMTB and, you know, the Tramways Board, which ran, you know, less efficiently than I think the current arrangements do. So we're going to make some announcements about buses in due course, quite soon. But we're very focused on better outcomes. You know, I was out in Cranbourne at a transport forum out there, and people said to me, well, I don't mind what big loops are put in. We actually just want simple bus services here. We've got thousands of new houses, some of them without any buses or any public transport at all. So we've announced that we will extend some of the rail services and some tram capacity, and there will be significant reviews of buses around that. In terms of our regional rail announcements, and I'm happy to talk about those in greater length later, that will also offer an opportunity to reform and prioritise bus services in particular areas. It's no use having fast trains with buses that don't meet them. It's no use having the times, you know, going at cross purposes. In David's area down on the peninsula, we're extending the train line from Frankston, if we're elected, to Baxter. Now that provides a fantastic opportunity to put some targeted, fast services to the tip of the peninsula, which is an area that's terribly underserviced at the moment.
Anybody for a follow-up question on transport? Anne, front here. Great.
I think that's, my name is Anna Chen. I think that tonight we have 3 councillors from Manningham. That is why Mr. Davis can tell that we take public transport very seriously, because Manningham is the only municipality in metropolitan Melbourne solely rely on buses as public transport services, and we over rely on just private vehicles. And I just wondering, the infrastructure Victoria has 30 years infrastructure strategy.
Yes.
That recommends to invest more greatly on bus networks. So I would love to know that whether Liberal Party will commit more funding to improve bus networks. Also, we have a concept called the 20 minutes neighborhood, where you honor the 20 minutes neighborhood concept once you are in the government, and then you build on that bus networks. For example, our Manningham already produced a Manningham bus networks documentation last year. They have a comprehensive assessments and recommendations, and that is my question. And more funding and 20 minutes neighbourhood concept.
Well, the first thing I'd say is stay tuned. The second thing I'd say is, as an old Doncaster boy who grew up in Doncaster and used the buses there, not much has improved, and I think that is a long-term problem. We actually need to get things a lot better. We do need better frequencies, and we do need reliability as well. Again, the fall in bus patronage off the back of massive city population growth. I mean, our population statewide is growing, last year 143,000, 90% of those in metropolitan Melbourne, and yet we've got falling bus patronage. It's not a coincidence that people are not using buses. The reliability is not there, the frequency is not there. You point to many of the key problems.
It's very frustrating to have to stay tuned for a specialised audience like tonight's, on pretty specific issues. It's a bit of a standard answer.
Well, it's also true. So yeah. we can't announce exactly at the time. There is a range of big announcements that will be made, and our parts of our transport policy are in the public domain, significant chunks of it that I've referred to, but not all of it.
Just a follow-up question.
Sure.
I take it you just mentioned about the bus services. You will resolve the issue as a long-term solutions. Can we take it? Can you commit a big as a short-term solution, or make it quicker, or to improve the bus network services or reliability?
Well, I'll be quickly revealing exactly what we're intending to do, but I can say that we will work closely with the individual bus companies and the sector. There is a preparedness on our side to engage honestly and genuinely with them, and we have done that. I've spent enormous amounts of time with many of the individual companies. I am very critical of the department and indeed the current minister, but longer term the department has been highly resistant to modest but practical changes. So I've had laid before me from bus companies simple proposals that improve routes without much cost, or sometimes with no cost, that have been submitted to the department that have been rejected without examination. So I mean, I think there's a huge amount that can be done without massive cost, but there is a need for additional spending, and there is a need for additional frequency, and there is a need for innovation with new routes as well. I'm not meaning Manningham alone. I mean, this is a broader city problem, but the department has been bloody-minded and thick about a lot of this. You know, if a bus company comes to you and has a proposed route change that improves frequency, improves the service to people with modest or no cost, I mean, why wouldn't you look at that?
I've got a follow-up transport question sent in. The recent announcement by Matthew Guy on regional fast European train network is a great initiative, but the estimated price tag has been labelled ambitious. When will the opposition...
By one paper, I think, but let's... Yeah.
Well, by this... Well,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Yes, and possibly by the person who sent this into the VLGA. When will the opposition release the full costing of this project? Can you rule out the selling of public assets or increasing fees or cuts to services?
So let's go backwards, and there'll be no fee rises beyond the normal CPI rises. We're not going to cut services. In fact, the opposite is the whole purpose of the announcement. We will not be selling assets. In fact, we'll be acquiring them. I've been very clear with suppliers that the opposition, if it's elected, will place an order for long-haul country rolling stock before June in 2019. So they are very aware of the requirements we have for that rolling stock, detailed information about those requirements, the strengthening of the nose, the buffet parts, the leg room, all of these key points. We're talking about acquiring new stock, massive new stock, to replace the long-haul rolling stock. Now, there's some in this room who'll remember Dick Hamer, who was a friend of mine. In his time, they ordered the first tranches of this rolling stock. So it's that long ago. It's clapped out. This is Wodonga, Warrnambool, sort of Bairnsdale and so forth, the long-haul stock. We've been quite clear that we'll place a $663 million order for that stock. We will also work with the current rolling stock to upgrade it. So there's a lot of the velocity trains that are due for mid-cycle maintenance beginning next year and 2020. And again, we've had discussions with the relevant firms about how that heavy mid-term, 15 years and a 30-year cycle upgrade where the motors are done and the gearing is rejigged, we will look at getting the upgraded velocities that will do the 200 Ks that we want. This is not winding back services, this is massively expanding it. And, the key point here is the state's population is growing like topsy. 143,000 last year, 147,000 the year before. Again, 85 or 90% of that into metropolitan Melbourne. We just can't go on and on and on without managing that. We need to, in my humble view and the opposition's view, decentralise. We need to move to a model where people can move to our regional cities swiftly, reliably, and so we do have ambitious targets we're actually going to do, and we know how to do this. 32 minutes to Ballarat, 32 minutes to Geelong, 45 minutes to Ballarat, 70 minutes to Bendigo. Same to Latrobe Valley. There are challenges in all of this, but I've had a good team of engineers working with me who've worked through all this. Our costings will come out in the normal way as we come towards the election. There's more to come on rail, so people would not think that that's the end of the picture. And I think this will change the state if it happens. I went to Balan yesterday, and the difference between a 1 hour trip to Balan from under here, from Southern Cross, to a 30-minute trip to Balan is revolutionary, and we know how to get the track out, we know how to do it, we know how to configure the trains, and if we're elected, we're going to do it.
Yeah, we'll just get a mic to you.
Looking at our numbers at Manningham, I hope you don't mind monopolising the transport question that my colleague asked. Can I take it a bit further?
Yep.
We are expected to accommodate the growth that Melbourne is experiencing, and this brings about all the undesirable things.
Congestion
and everything. I went to pick up a bus at a stop about 1 kilometre from where I live, and it took 10 minutes. I could see the bus, and yet I could see the bus coming, but it took 7 minutes. Why? Because the traffic was so heavy that the bus couldn't get there on time. So are you, by increasing frequencies and other things, you're not going to solve the problem down the track when things are going to get worse? You need more radical solutions. Are you planning or thinking about some radical solutions, particularly for a unique suburb like ours? For instance, a lot of our residents still dream about the promised train that never came. Have you dismissed?
Well, I think Joan Kerner sold the reservation in the 1980s. Some of us remember that. As I say, I grew up in Doncaster. I know it very well. There was a reservation there for a train line which was sold off. So, look, we are very aware of the enormous challenges. Some of this is in the growth areas. Some of it is in the communications and the trips to our regional cities, and some of it's in metropolitan Melbourne. We actually have to get our trains running better. The punctuality and the reliability of our train system has fallen. Our bus system, as you point out, has actually deteriorated significantly, and we have to think of new ways, and we will.
Whilst on that, could I ask, if you do become government, will you continue the North East Dinellas work, or will you come up with other plans that I'm sure you understand what I mean?
Yeah. So we've said three things. We've let me go through the road projects one by one. The big road projects, and there's many smaller ones as well. In the case of the Westgate Tunnel, we had some serious reservations about the route and the way it was run forward through a particular style, if I can put it kindly, of market-led proposal, and through the funding of it, which is basically through jacking up the tolls on the existing toll roads for those who don't actually use the new tunnel. However, we lost that fight. And in politics, sometimes you have to reflect and deal with the reality of situations where your view has failed and a different view has prevailed. And we've accepted that. So we now say that road will be built. It is being built. And, it's going to... I'm furious with the government that they failed to table the toll deed variations. They have them. The Parliament demanded them, and they refused to table those toll deed variations, knowing that the CityLink Act contained a revocation clause that would have enabled us to, in the upper house alone, unpick those arrangements. However, that's done and dusted. The North East Link, we support that road, and we see that that's a very important road linking from the big loop around the top of the city and coming down. Now, there's some things we don't like about that, and some of them are that the engagement with councils has not been sufficient, and indeed with a number of the councils, and Cynthia will attest to this, we have actually gone forward to engage directly with councils and say we are going to be listening to their input on how that North-East Link is constructed, and I've separately met with Banyul in recent weeks with David Hodgett, my counterpart, to hear how we can do that with the most reduced impact on those communities. So I think that's actually quite important. I'm not pretending that this is an easy way forward, but I am aware of the need to engage and actually try and learn from local people how we can minimise the impact. We have also said we will build an east-west link. Now, that was our policy prior to 2014. The contract was signed, construction had started, and the new government cancelled that contract. Initially, we were told that that would not cost anything. It's cost at least $1.3 billion. But that road, we think, should connect to the end of the Westgate Tunnel and through to the North East Link.
Will this take precedence over the North?
Both will happen
At the same time?
close to the same time, yeah. So we are very aware of the significance of those connections.
I don't see how you can argue that the Northern Arterial is completing the ring road, because it doesn't complete the ring road. It's a Northern Arterial.
Yep.
That's going through my suburb, and that's my ward. And at one point in that road, there's 18 lanes.
Yep.
Our Director of Infrastructure made the comment last night, mathematically it just doesn't work that 18 lanes of traffic will be coming down into the city and not causing chaos. So,
which is one reason we think that the East-West Link must be built concurrent with it, because of the linkage across to the Westgate Tunnel, and some of that traffic, including the truck traffic, will go that way. Some of it will, I accept, go the opposite direction, and I understand perhaps, is this the ultimate and best model? Well, we think we can work with councils, and I'm very happy to meet with David Hodgett and Banyul to hear your views on how we can get the best outcome.
It's not the best model, because what it does, it brings all the freight down into our suburbs, amongst our community and our children, and it brings all that pollution down into the suburbs, where it should be going around Melbourne, from Hastings, around Melbourne, up into...
So the government has rejected, the current government rejected this model. We're not wanting to overturn all of the work and the decisions. Well, I'm just...
work has been done.
A huge amount of preparatory work has been done. The government...
They haven't spent that much. I mean, Labor cancelled your contract.
Which we don't think was a good model.
Well, they're not going to sign the contract unless they're re-elected. So you're not...
but they've done enormous amounts of the work. So
it's not a huge amount of work.
Well,
far less than you had last time. Last time,
I accept
the
that,
Liberals signed a contract, and the penalties as well.
I accept that this is, not everything is perfect about this, and again...
It's very unperfect.
Yep.
It's a great big freeway right through a community that doesn't have to happen.
And I've had this point made to me by a number of many people,
Yeah.
and I understand the problem. The decision is the government is proceeding with that model. They've actually gone to the market, they've actually provided information to the market, and they've said if they're re-elected they will move within 100 days.
What about this though? If you
well,
complete the ring road, you don't have to have a great big massive northern arterial. If you complete the ring road, the freight will be off the roads or away from the people, and you have a much smaller road just for the commuters from the northern suburbs. How about that?
Well, that is not the decision that government made and then proceeded with a lot of the background work with. We will be the inheritors of an enormous amount of work that has occurred. Do we agree with all of that? Not necessarily. And can we get a better solution in some areas? Potentially. And we're happy to have that discussion.
Look at it again. So if you're elected, you'll
we've made a policy decision about which direction we'll go, but I can indicate that we're very happy to come and engage with your council, as we've done with Burundara and Banyul, and I will personally make sure we do that in coming weeks.
I do, because we're the biggest losers in this.
Okay.
Well, the Banyul people might have a different view, but they have certainly made their view known to me, and others have too.
Jackie.
Yep.
We've talked about trains and talked about buses. Tram system, which was basically set out in 1929 and was never 29 plan was never completed because of depression. It only covers 25% of Melbourne. Melbourne's expanded dramatically since that period of time, and huge numbers of metropolites have no access to tram. It ended up in, a lot of the tram routes ended up in irrational areas, not near the activity centres and extensions. There's a whole lot of things to be done with trams. I'd like to hear from both sides as to what proposals there are to rationalise the tram system, extend tram routes, introduce light rail. Fast light rail is cheaper, considerably cheaper than...
Okay, yep, terrific.
And there's been proposals put forward by Rail Futures and others as to some very significant routes that could immeasurably change, including Doncaster.
Yep. So the first thing I'll say is that our announcements about these things will come in coming weeks. Notwithstanding that, we are very receptive to the central point that people like Rail Futures have made, which is that we have a very significant radial train system and we have inadequate cross links and arrangements across. You're right that much of the trunk area of our tram system is, has not had huge extensions. Some extensions have occurred. I mean, in my own area, the 109 going out to Box Hill and things like that were significant extensions in the 1990s. But notwithstanding that, your point is correct, and there are opportunities to expand our system and get much better outcomes, and we will have more to say about some of those points. I think that we've got to be clever about how we look at the opportunities that occur around our tram routes, and there are opportunities to help fund those with various development opportunities if they're managed properly and held within reasonable bounds. But certainly, we actually need to look at ways to bring our tram routes
Okay,
forward.
no, we're going to go quickly over here. We're running out of time. Okay, all right, David, would you like to... Morris?
You have no trams.
Yeah,
I have no trams.
there you go.
What proposals?
I think we're
David's in charge of public
he's in
transport.
charge of public transport, so I think that is reasonable to address it to the Minister over here. Thank you. To the Shadow Minister, I should say, yeah.
Cynthia Watson, City of Burundara, and Before I ask my questions, I also want to echo Paul's concerns about the North East Link. As you know, we share absolutely the concerns that she's expressed tonight. My question gets away from transport, and there were two things that the Labor government has done which has caused me great concern because I think they're bad for our communities. And the first was the annualising of the valuations and centralising of the valuations. My view is that they've created another piece of silverware to sell, to annualise government revenue. That makes it absolutely plum pickings for revenue raising for who knows what. If, as many of the councillors in the room would know, when it comes to revaluations, councils offer a service, and this, what the government is offering, is not a service. In fact, it's an unservice, if there is such a word. And so my question relates to that. Are you going to unpick that ball of yarn? And second thing that has been concerned is the sale of the titles office. I also think that our residents will come out on the wrong end of the pineapple on that, and I'm very concerned. So could you address those two pieces of policy that have come out of this particular government and say what you're going to do about that?
So we've just, I'm in my committee, the committee I chair in the upper house, the Environment and Planning Committee, has just completed an inquiry into the government's commercialisation of the titles office. And we are, and I invite people to go and read what has been said there. It was a short, sharp inquiry. There was a lot of evidence taken. It's not clear that the government has got the model right. I don't have a problem with some private involvement per se, but I am cautious, I'm very cautious about seeing a damaged arrangement in place where our titles are put at risk and where the security of the Torrens system is in any way imperilled. And we've said that in our report, and we've pointed to a lot of deficiencies in where the government was going. Now, if I'm to be giving some mild credit to the government for a moment, they actually did respond to a number of the criticisms that were made during the inquiry, and they did actually clean up aspects of the process. So I'm not, you know, do I feel greatly comfortable about where it is? No. Do I feel there's been some improvement in what they were doing? Yes. If I say something about the annualisation of the rating cycle, which is local government, but it impacts directly on land tax, and I think that's actually the main driver from the government's.
The Treasurer brought in the bill that made the changes, so that gives the clue as to where it's coming from.
You know, and to be frank, I actually think we had a very good system here with biannual valuations conducted by councils who, as David cleverly outlined before, actually have no interest in cheating or manipulating or getting wrong the system of valuation. State government potentially has a conflict of interest. It potentially seeks to up value because its land tax take goes up, whereas councils, where the valuations were provided by councils had no interest in doing anything other than providing an accurate valuation for the apportionment of their rates inside their council, and then the state government was forced to rely on those, as it were, independent valuations for its land tax purposes. So I actually think in some ways we had a very good system and we were very critical of it. There's another aspect that I think made me very nervous, and I wrote about this in The Australian a couple of weeks ago, and that is the PEXA arrangements, and that is the exchange, the electronic exchange, and I'm very nervous about the decision of the state government to mandate from the 1st of October all property transactions in Victoria must go through PEXA, and it's a monopoly. There are others who may come into the market as the equivalent of PEXA, but they are not there yet, and it is now not possible to transfer a title manually with paper. You can't do it. There is no legal way you can do it because the titles office has mandated an electronic transfer. So, you know, there's a set of issues there. The complexity of stuff around the subdivision, major subdivisions. So if you look at some of these large buildings in this precinct, many of these are owned by multiple owners, and that complex subdivision that occurs is reflected in the titles. And I'm quite cautious about how the commercialisation of the titles office works with that complex set of title arrangements. So that's a very long way of answering a question, because there's just frankly huge detail in behind that. You know, land tax revenue is up massively, and stamp duty revenue is up massively. State government, you know, needs to be thoughtful about the impact of those things.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wait. The time is actually up. We've got time.
No, I'm happy to very quickly
all right,
answer
have to
what
be
is a
really
very
quick.
important question.
Okay.
Our history in government, both in the 1990s and between 2010 and 2014, is that we did not jack up land tax. Land tax generally ought to have the scales adjusted with the movement in the valuations. This government has not done that. It has scooped in more and more and more. So I don't think we're promising to immediately cut land tax. What we're saying is that we will not unreasonably take more and more and more in the way that has occurred.
Final written in question. I might direct this one to you because you've been a bit peppered.
Yep.
Loves it.
The government, I'm sure you love it too, right? The government has recently launched the Best Practice Guide for Gender Equality in Local Government. What is your position on gender equality?
I think it's a good start. It would take me some time to sort of go through the document and
it's not that long, actually. I've read it.
38 pages
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Some parts I like better than others.
Yep.
I have some reservations about professional development for councillors that's intended to change their views, or perhaps, you know, I think we need to be cautious. I'm not saying that work is not necessary. I mean, there's been enough older men in local government for a very long time that clearly there's in some cases there's an issue. But I think we need to be cautious about how that is handled. I might just find my notes here, because I thought there were a couple of things that were worth raising if the question came up. So in terms of professional development for council officers, I think that's there is nothing in the policy around council employees that I really have any issues with at all. I think it's a good thing. In fact, I think the focus on leadership development, which I think is in the third part of the document, I think that's something that really could be built upon. I do have some concerns about the efficacy of guides. We've had a multitude of guides for local government, and they're very much optional. So, you know, I think that's probably the starting point. The other point I'd made is I think we need, if councils to go down this path, and I would be supportive of that, it is essential that every council have a clear policy framework so that there is no no capacity for sniping, no capacity for, this is preferred treatment or whatever. The framework needs to be out there to make it clear to the world that this is the way this organisation operates from now on. I think that's, so the policy framework, the transparency is absolutely critical. I think it's a better start than the local government bill. I'd like to see, and I haven't seen, to be fair, any feedback at all from the sector. We've just had the document put out there. And if anyone here wants to provide me with some feedback, I'd be very pleased to hear it. But I think it's a good start. And the other point I wanted to make is I think the work the VLGA has done in this space over the last couple of years particularly has been good work. And you look at the rise in the proportion of female councillors particularly, that's a move in the right direction, and I think it's getting that, so I was saying about leadership development, it's about creating that opportunity, and then you get some success stories, and that provides the example for others who perhaps might not have been prepared to put their hand up, whether it's an elected member or whether it's, I won't stay working in the community services area, which unfortunately is where the vast majority of our female staff are at the moment. I'll have a crack at engineering or some other more male-dominated space. So I think it's a good start.
Our time, it really has run. Are you happy to take one more really quick one from one person who hasn't asked? Have to be really quick and a really brief answer.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson from Hume City Council, thank you kindly for taking questions tonight. Just to provide a little bit of context around my question.
Really quick, yeah.
The Honourable Matthew Guy, MP, Leader of the Opposition, has publicly stated that if the Liberal Party wins the state election, that it will create a new Sudbury Council, and in doing so he will appoint commissioners to oversee the secession from Hume City Council. We've written to Mr Guy seeking a meeting to understand more about the process that will be undertaken. Our Mayor and CEO have met with you, Mr Morrison and Mr Bull, and there's been no indication to Council about what this means, particularly for the role of councillors and how and when it will occur. So could you please shed some light for us on this, and will you, Mr Morris and Mr Guy, please meet with Council and or the Mayor to outline how and when this process will take place?
I think I've had a recent request from Matthew's office. Would I meet with the council again? I'll be very happy to. I'm not sure that Matthew's going to be able to in the time between now and the election, given that we're around about 30 days from the polls opening.
From opening,
from
right.
Opening, from the first votes being cast. I have, the policy intent is pretty clear and it's been known for some time. There is some supporting detail around the policy which will go some way towards providing the information that you're seeking. And what I'm endeavouring to do is make sure that we've got the policy in the marketplace so we can have a more detailed discussion.
As yet, Council has not been informed in any detail.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it there because we really do have to wrap up. But I want to thank you for your question. I want to thank all of you for your questions. It's been a fascinating hour, and I mostly want to thank you both for turning up and for being happy to answer anything that's thrown at you. It is certainly not always the case that MPs will allow for that. And it's really always a terrific thing when somebody's able to walk into a forum and whatever's thrown at them is fine. So thank you. And as I've said to all the guests in this series, all the very best. And I think it's going to be a really interesting next couple of weeks. And who knows what the 24th of November will bring.
Can we thank you too, Sally and Catherine and the VLGA for the opportunity. We're very, and indeed Pitcher Partners for your generous hosting. today. It's
And
been a pleasure.
there's one final event too on the 7th of, what is it? The 1st of November with the Greens. So have a look at the VLGA website. It's got all the details on it there. It's a daytime event, that one, and that will be the three major parties then all contributing to this really fascinating series. So thank you all. There's still time for a glass of wine, and perhaps if I cut you off or you didn't get a chance to ask another question, David may still be around for a few minutes. David Davis, Dave Morris, thank you very, very much.
Pleasure.